If you're a first-time homebuyer, then this video is for you because we're going to talk about a process that first-time homebuyers need to know about. Now, with these three items here, they each have individual videos on my page, but I haven't talked about how they all tie in together. So we're going to explain how they do, and this is why it's also just as important to watch the whole video in detail, okay? Now, the first topic is earnest money. What is earnest money? It's basically money you put down when you're going to buy a house. Maybe it's $500, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. All depends on the market. And say you're a day from closing, you just want to, I just don't want to buy this house anymore. Well, that money gets deposited to the seller, in essence, good faith for pulling their house off the market. And closing sometimes can take 30, 40 plus days. And when their house is off the market for that long, they could have maybe got a better offer. So it's basically good faith for the seller pulling their house off the market, and it gets deposited to the seller. Okay, now how do you deposit the earnest money? Now there's a couple ways. The first way, and first off, my drawing skills are getting a lot better, and I drew a check here. Now you could write up a check for, like we said, $1,500, $2,000. I take it, deposit in a trust account, and then it stays there, and we'll decide later on if it gets deposited towards the seller, or maybe it makes it all the way to the closing, and then you could speak with, if you're doing a loan, speak with your loan provider and then see how you want to deal with it. Okay, so the first way is a check and the other way is a wire, and we just talk about kind of how that works. All right, closing. So now let's say you do get to closing and you're doing a loan. You can speak with your loan provider, say, hey, maybe I'm not a loan provider, by the way. So maybe you want to do, that money go towards closing costs. Maybe that money goes towards down payment. Many options, speak with a loan provider and they'll tell you kind of how to do it. All right, refundable. So now this is where it's important to watch how all these tie in together. So maybe you're a week when buying a house and you deposit $2,000 and now I want to back out. Let's see if maybe that could be refundable. And the next topic is contingencies. All right, so what is a contingency? It protects the buyer in case maybe there's something wrong. Now, what are these contingencies? Now, there's a bunch of them. All right, I just have a couple on the board here. First one could be a home inspection. So let's say you hire a home inspector, they walk through the house, and there's a lot of red flag items, and now as the buyer you just feel uncomfortable and you'd be like, you know what, I wanted to buy this house, but after seeing all these red items and red flags, I just don't know if it's a good idea. I don't want to buy this house anymore. Okay, now we'll talk about timeline, and if you're in that timeline, well, you can back out of the contract and keep your earnest money, which is good. And it's also why it's important to get these contingencies. Okay, now another one could be an appraisal. So now you understand, okay, that maybe there's nothing wrong with inside the house or the outside. We feel good there. Now let's just say, for example, I have a appraisal video in depth, but I'll just run through a scenario here. So let's just say purchase price is $300,000 and you have the appraisal contingency and the appraisal comes in at $280,000. Now we'll talk about negotiations a little bit, but let's just say the seller, because you have to hit, how are you going to close that gap? Okay, there's a $20,000 gap. Is the seller going to come down in price to $280,000? Is the buyer going to have to pay $20,000? They're going to split the difference. If that's the seller isn't going to come down and you physically don't have the money to split that difference, well, that contingency can help you back out of the contract and keep your earnest money, okay? And we'll talk about negotiations in a little bit, but that's how it can protect you as a buyer. And those are just two scenarios. There's like sewer ones, there's lead-based paint, there's a whole bunch of contingencies, but I just chose two of the main ones that you'll probably see. Now, timeline. So can I have the home inspection and contingency go all the way through until closing? Maybe. Well, think of it from the seller's point of view. Would you want to accept that offer if it goes till a day until closing, the home inspection contingency, and they could just come out of left field, the buyer could, and say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable in this, I want to back out. Well, timelines, it all depends on how strong the offer is, but if they're very long, that's kind of risky for the seller to take, so you might not get that. So might just see 1 to 2 weeks. That's, could be common. Every market is different, but that's kind of what to expect for maybe a house inspection. Each other one could be different. Now, leverage. So I think that they're also very high leverage plays as well to get contingencies, because we'll talk about negotiations in a little bit. But say you do find something in the house inspection and the seller isn't going to repair it, you could say, you know what, if you don't do this, I'm going to back out and keep my earnest money. Okay, so that's how it could maybe be even a leverage play. Now let's talk about negotiations, and this drawing is really good. I spent a lot of time on this one, so I feel happy about this drawing here. Now, negotiations. So we just talked about repairs here. So maybe let's run through a scenario. Maybe the seller doesn't want to fix a repair and instead give you a credit. And that credit could maybe help pay for some closing costs instead. You can see that it's a kind of a common thing. And we just talked about, hey, Mr. Seller, if you don't fix XYZ, I'm gonna back out and keep my earnest money. Now, maybe you could do that, but also in negotiations, it depends on motivation and leverage. And I have a video specifically about this, and it's very, very, very important. So you should probably watch that one too, but I'll explain it a little bit right now. So let's just say your motivation for buying a house is you don't need to buy one. So if this happens where you have to back out, you're okay. Maybe you're living at home, or maybe your apartment lease is longer. Okay, so your motivation on there is you don't have to buy something now. So you can use that in your advantage and be like, you know what, if you actually don't fix these things, then I can back out and be just fine. And on the flip side, maybe the seller has to sell this house. Maybe there's a home sale contingency, so they have to sell their house by the next. So maybe they have to sell their house. They have to. And you might have that motivation and leverage on your side to where they might actually accept those things, to repair those things, give you those credits. That's why it's very important to maybe you have the right motivation leverage, and it's also just as important to not tell anyone your motivation and leverage, okay? Because if someone knows maybe the opposite side of your motivation, like, you know what? If you're the seller, these guys, they need to move right now. They need to buy a house right now. No, I know that they have to, so no, I'm not gonna do your repairs, which is why it's important to just keep things quiet. And also disclosure. So let's run it back. Say that you find something in house inspection and it's a material fact, okay? And the seller maybe doesn't repair XYZ things. Well, that thing, if it's a material fact, is going to get disclosed to the next buyer because material fact, and you can use that to your advantage. Be like, you know what? If you don't do these things, you're gonna have to tell the next buyer anyways. Now, Mr. Seller, are you gonna get that same price for your house? Is it gonna be lower? So you might run into a scenario where the seller might accept to do these things because they'll have to disclose these items to the next buyer, which is why it's important to get that contingency because it protects you as a buyer. And all in all, they're very important as a first-time home buyer, because if you just think about it, maybe you get a house inspection, okay, you're not protected, but you feel confident, on the outside, the insides of the house, the appraisal. Now you're good on potentially like the money side. Okay, it hit the appraisal, we're good there. Maybe you get a sewer line inspection. Okay, the sewer line inspection came out good, so I feel protected there, I feel protected there, I feel protected there. That makes you feel just very confident when you're gonna buy a house that this is the right house for you and to prevent maybe any problems, okay? That's how all of these things tie together, and this is why I made that video. So if you found this video valuable, please leave a like and drop a comment. Say, hey, I want you to talk more about earnest money, or I want you to talk more about contingencies. I'll go ahead and do that. But thank you for watching. Have a good one. Bye.